all those guys who wrote back then, it was a fantastic time to take time to do that. And I just happened to think of right now of back when Pulsifer and all those three young rookie
Wilson
pitchers.
and Isringhausen.
Yes, yes. And they were going to change the world, and you were like reading it and trying to decide. And then they don't change the world, and then you learn a little something about baseball.
Yeah, no, well, yeah. I mean, the delta, if you will, between pitching prospect optimism and pitching prospect results has been a long-standing drama for Mets fans in particular. Although, we've had a lot of great pitchers. We've had an incredible number of great pitchers, and occasionally some of them of the Nolan Ryan variety who didn't get great until they left, but did great, gave flashes of it before then. But which actually is kind of, for a Mets fan now, it's unusual because there isn't much in the way of pitching prospects coming out of the farm system. And, in the unusual position of having to try to make that up with the offense. But yeah, I mean, the pitching prospects have always been a great part of the spring, and seeing who comes in on fire and maybe surprises people. And every year there's people who surprise people in the regular season as well, who young pitchers who never quite put it together at the minor league level. And then you don't get that many hitters like that. There's always some, who come in and they were good prospects, but they just sort of kick it into a high gear. They have a career, particularly like 25-year-old rookie who has a career rookie year. But the number of guys who just do things at the major league level that they never did in the minors as pitchers, we never run out of them.
Baseball is one of those games where there doesn't have to be a traditional arc. Like, let's say you're a Dodger prospect, because they're loaded all the time. You may not mature until you're 25, 27 years old, and because that team is championship grade. So you get shipped off somewhere else and you play, or maybe you come up and then you get all of your peak years and then that's it. But that's what that path looks like. You may not even make the big leagues because you don't have the quality of coaching that example here the Dodgers have in their minor leagues. There's so many variables. There's the kid that goes to the indie ball and he learns the Mexican curve or whatever it is, and he shows up. Or dudes like Joey Bats, when he erupts, he goes from being sort of a prospect to this fairly short career big bat guy up in Toronto. There's so many of those stories in baseball, but I don't think those exist in hockey, certainly not in basketball, and almost never in football do you find someone who, Kurt Warner is one of the obvious exceptions, but who comes from nowhere and then all of a sudden is great.
Yeah, like I was reading, some stuff about one of the Mets pitching prospects, a guy named Matt Allen, right? Now, I would not put good money on Matt Allen being a successful major league pitcher. He has not pitched in professional baseball since 2019, at which time he pitched like 10 innings, right? And this guy, the minor leagues were canceled in 2020, and then he had Tommy John surgery, had UCL surgery. The guy has he's been snake bit, but he was a high leverage prospect. He was 18 when they picked him, so he's still like 23, 24 now. Once in a while, a guy with that kind of background turns out to have a short path from the guy nobody has heard of to, the next thing you know, he wins 15 games in the major leagues. And there's always every camp's got a couple of those guys like that. And there's always somebody out there who strikes lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. And we, baseball holds these stories well too. I don't know how much you know about Kenny Rogers is coming up into baseball, but he just barely made it. He shouldn't have made it. Like not just like, you're never going to make it, kid. All of the odds are against him. And look, this is his claim. Maybe it's apocryphal. He's like, the only reason why I didn't get released in one of the minor league teams was because I brought them strawberries from my family's farm all the time. It's built an affinity for him, But
yeah. That's like the story of how Black Sabbath hired Ozzy Osbourne as their lead singer because he had amps, right? They needed amps, and he had amps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, well, one of the few things that Mets fans and Yankee fans would agree on is wishing that Kenny Rogers had not made the major leagues. But that's another story.
Yeah, but turned out to be a 200+ game winner, and
Yeah,
gosh,
he was
you know,
a
like,
solid career.
Are there aces anymore?
That is what I'm wondering. I mean, I think the aces will be back, but
Okay.
I'm not sure that maybe in a different form, just as each generation of them seems to be a different form. But yeah, I look out there at guys like Scherzer and Verlander and Kershaw, you know, who are sort of wheezing through their last, you know, trying to squeeze that last bit of guile and competitiveness out of their arms. And thinking, where's the next generation of guys like that? And I don't know. We may not, you know, Greinke, I guess, is gone now. I mean, all three of those guys could be gone very, very soon.
Yeah.
You know, they're all talking a good game because they're cut the uniform off them guys, but that day comes. But yeah, I do wonder what we're gonna see in terms of, you know, not just guys who come up and I mean, I guess Chris Sale is another one like that, but you know, not just guys who come up and show the flashes of that, but the guys who can do that year in and year out. I mean, that's why, I mean, lowered expectations are why we're talking about, you know,
Right.
like CC Sabathia in the Hall of Fame. Like, CC was nothing great by historical standards, but you know, by the standards of his time, it's another story. You know, he was a hoss. And so, you know, I think it is. I mean, I think that's sort of the biggest crisis in a sense for the game. I think a lot of the sort of the appeal of baseball is doomed stuff is silly. You know, 1.3 million people paid last season to attend White Sox games. Now, this is the worst brand of baseball you could ever possibly purchase in a city that has another baseball team with a lovely park. You know, and yet people still come. You know, it doesn't have to be the undisputed national pastime, which it hasn't been in a while, to survive as a major commercial enterprise, to survive as the kind of sport where a team like the Dodgers can be like, well, we're going to go out and we're going to spend $1 billion on 2 players. And then next year we're going to have more money to spend. Right. So I'm not worried about that. But in terms of quality of the game, I am worried just at a quality of the game level about, you know, are we reaching the point where it's just hard to, you know, where it's just hard to have pitchers who are stars anymore, you know, guys who are durable enough to put up multiple years of impactful innings and big games and not reach a point where you're just cycling through a whole, you know, your staff is basically just middle relievers, right, all the way down. That's one of, I guess, the other thing that worries me about the future of the game is that idiot commissioners will keep tampering with the rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely impacted the game in terms of stolen bases. You know, I'm not mad at anybody going out and doing what they got to do, making their team win and do whatever it is. But I don't understand for the life. And there's academic medical research that says if you are a giant dude running at a league leading speed and you steal bases and hit the ground, I don't know, 85 times or more, your opportunity to get injured significantly is like, it's unsustainable. And we saw that with, and I'm basically describing Ohtani, like, you don't need that dude to steal 50 bases. I know it's neat, but it accounted for
look at Acuna.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like, stop. Don't do those things. Your bat is so much more valuable. Those stolen bases. So he contributed, this is by my math, but about 6 extra runs to Ohtani's season, which is really, it's insignificant. It's really statistically insignificant.
Well, if you really wanted to play Russian roulette with a guy with that kind of bat, you wouldn't just have him steal 50 bases a year. You'd also have him throw 180 innings. But there you go. He's just, you know, guys like that are built different. They don't like being told not to do something.
Yeah, and you love that about him, right? But so Otani's second elbow lasted 75 starts. And if anybody remembers those last several starts when he was already injured, they weren't all that great. So, his third elbow will not last 75 starts. We know these things as well. Although, do things happen? Sure. But is he going to be pitching? And he's even said, he's like, this is my last shot at pitching. When he blows that elbow out, that'll be it for that. He might be able to throw hard, but he won't be able to be a pitcher anymore. And that's a reality of where he is. Him, DeGrom, I mean, Thor, he's gone altogether. He's not going to ever come back to the big leagues. Guys who get their elbows rebuilt for that third time, they don't pitch anymore.
Yeah, I mean, DeGrom has been one of the most sort of frustrating spectacles in memory. A guy who just every year he seems to get better and better in less and less time. Yeah. And I mean, the Mets went through the Kodai Jenga, spectacle last year, right? He pitched once in the regular season, and then they had to saddle him up in big games in the postseason, and he wasn't quite there.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at like the Yankees. I mean, would you really want to be betting that heavily on Max Fried? Max Fried's a heck of a pitcher, but again, the injury risk is very high. I mean, that's one reason I think why it made so much sense for the Mets to spend so much money on Juan Soto, right? Because now anybody can get hurt, and when it comes to being signed with the Mets, your risk of that inherently goes up. But the odds, sort of the standard deviation, if you will, the variance of what you can expect to get year to year with Juan Soto compared to Max Fried, it's no contest.
Yeah. DeGrom's interesting. Obviously when his arm is functioning, it's hard to be a better pitcher in the history of the game. And the guy from our youth was Saberhagen, who doesn't make the Hall of Fame, but was world class if he was healthy. And even he's got more starts than DeGrom can ever have. There's just no way that DeGrom is ever going to be as bountiful with his innings and starts than Saberhagen.
In retrospect, and I say this in retrospect, but I was saying it at the time, like from about 1995 on, they should have moved Saberhagen to the bullpen while he still had an arm left. I think he had an Eckersley second act in him, because he was basically the same kind of pitcher as Eckersley, right? A guy with amazing control. A real strikeout pitcher, but not a guy with an overpowering fastball, not a really big guy, right? And Eck had those, he had a couple of good years and then like 2 great years as a starting pitcher, but then he was just up and down. Now his issues, he had, he had issues with drinking and stuff that he kind of screwed himself up for a few years there. And, and so that sort of turning that around helped him turn things around in the bullpen. But I think Saberhagen could easily have followed the Eckersley path. Had he tried. I think they tried moving him to the bullpen maybe at the very end, but it was sort of too late.
Yeah. He, for sure, when he was with the Mets, he's great. He didn't pitch all the time, but by today's standards, they'd be like, that's our ace.
Yeah.
Even though
180 innings, man.
Woo! The Dodger thing, and again, this goes back to the ace thing. My fellow Dodger fans are going like, we have 5 aces. Like, no, you don't. If Glasnow can't pitch more than 110 innings, which reliably he can't, that's not an ace. That's a guy who's around for 4 months. And even then you're going easy on his arm and putting a lot of weight on the bullpen. The bullpen can handle it. Okay, they built a bullpen for that. We can't expect 150 innings from Otani nor Kershaw. We've never seen Sasaki pitch ever in the big leagues. Yamamoto couldn't withstand his first big league. Snell, I haven't heard an ace among all those names. They're all brilliant pitchers, but they're all deeply flawed. When I think about an ace,
as a Dodger fan, you're never going to see. Okay, you're never going to see another Sandy Koufax, but you have a better chance of seeing another Koufax than you have of seeing another Don Sutton. Right, a guy you just you stick him in the rotation, and he shows up every 5 days for 22 years. I think he missed like 4 starts or something at one point, but and they literally the guy, he just never missed a turn for 22 years.
Yeah.
He was not a great pitcher. He was a good pitcher, but a good pitcher at that volume gets you 324 wins in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, you don't have to be very excited. I mean, well, all the guys in that bandwidth right there, yeah, in terms of wins, Ryan and God, I mean, there are just so many of those dudes that just stood out there and that said, I'm just going to give you 35 starts a year for the next 15 years. Is that valuable to you? There's not a GM in baseball that'd say no to that right now.
Right. And well, I mean, Ryan was such a freak of nature, right? Ryan was the guy who, I mean, Ryan struggled with the Mets in part because Tom Seaver insisted on pitching every 5th day, and Ryan needed to pitch every 4th day because he was wilder if he was off longer. So, like, literally in his prime, Ryan would be like, he'd go out there and throw like 200 pitches and be like, I need to start now in another 3 days.
Yeah. That's there's a lot of pitchers like that struggle with some aspect of their game. It might have been Julio Urias. He was like, I'm going to be wild in the first inning. So they just bring him in the second and he wouldn't get that start. And sure enough, he'd be pretty good, And so there's these weird things that come up that do, like where you play matters, right? And if you play on a bad team, Ryan played on some dreadful teams. He's got more 0-0 like losses, 0-1 losses than anybody. Well, maybe him and who was it? I think it's Walter Johnson.
Yeah.
But similar pitchers, right? They could dominate another team, but if their team didn't do anything, then they were going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, Johnson threw 110 shutouts, but you can't win a game with 0 runs. You just can't.
Right. Right. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. You go ahead.
But I mean, look at a classic example is now look at the Orioles, right? I mean, the team that they've got right now. I mean, that is a wonderful collection of young talent. But I mean, the pitching injuries they had last year were just unbelievable. And now without Burns, Burns was not elite last year the way he was in the past, but he gave them 32 starts, right? And like that was so valuable to that team. And so, where do you fill that in to be able to capitalize on this amazing roster full of, young guys hitting their mid-20s who are just, they should be owning this division if they're healthy, but
yeah, it almost feels like their championship window is closing because they have these young guys, but they don't have all of the pieces. The timing hasn't been great for them.
Yeah, and I mean they have arms. They have good arms, but they just, you looked at last year, guys like Rodriguez and Bradish and Means and all these people who just couldn't, they had various degrees of healthiness, but none of them could pace out a full season.
Yeah. Has the game changed? I think there's so many different factors that go into. And I think we've discussed this in past shows. Like we want to hang one value on one attribute, and so like PEDs. Like, well, there was 4 teams of expansion. Working out had become okay. Video, chewing that up. Modern coaching, all these things. Has it made it so that just the contest is higher for pitchers and batters than it could have been 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, because look, I mean, your baseline has to be to look at other sports, right? It's sort of man versus track, man versus pool, man versus high jump bar. And you see that everybody's getting, it's just better nutrition, training, all of this stuff. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. And I think baseball uniquely, particularly pitching, relies on some motions where the bigger and stronger and faster you are and the bigger and harder you have to throw, you're just putting stress on the joints in ways that they just cannot handle beyond a certain point. And that's I don't know that there's a good way around that. I mean, the one thing that to me that's the real killer app I'd still love to see somebody try is to find another like Necro style knuckleballer, like not just a guy who throws a knuckler, but somebody who throws it well enough that they can really make it their, I throw this 85% of the time kind of pitch. Because I don't know why that would I think you could probably still put the same amount of stress on your body that,
Ooh.
a 50s or 70s knuckleballer could. And if you get one of those guys and he's throwing 300 innings a year in today's game,
Yeah.
you have just freed up so much space,
Yeah. Yeah.
and time for the rest of your pitching staff. It would just be an absolute game changer to have a roster like that. But where do you find those guys? Because you got to start if you're going to be a Hoyt Wilhelm or a Phil Niekro or somebody, you got to start throwing that thing when you're like 6, and you got to accept the fact that you're going to start throwing it when you're 6, and you're not going to make a major league rotation until you're like 28, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's that, or just a changeup, a fastball changeup guy, and you just have, like when Pedro had his changeups that would break in 3 directions, and he really made it impossible for people. I'm also a believer that tunneling, making the ball come out of the same spot, there's a lot of deception in that. I think there's also a lot of damage in that. Like, you have your natural throwing motion, and when you get out of that, or when you get tired and that unnatural motion, puts extra stress. We know we're tearing up elbows for some reason. And a Pete rule from way back is, there's a guy throwing 100 plus miles an hour. That guy's about to blow out his arm. That Pete rule still applies. I mean, whether it was Matt Anderson, Joel Zamaya, other than maybe Aroldis Chapman and Nolan Ryan, nobody throws above 100 for very long without destroying their arm. It's just how it is.
Yeah, somebody like Feller. Nobody knows exactly how fast Feller threw. He might have thrown around that, but even he, we don't know. I mean, he started wearing down in a hurry after he got back from the war, and that was after having 3 years of not pitching. So
right, and combat time.
It's whole different kind of stresses. So
he wasn't on Hawaii playing baseball.
Right, he was operating an anti-air battery on the side of a ship. So
yeah. You mentioned the Soto signing, and I'm pretty, look, obviously anybody can get hurt, right? But he has not played 1 minute of baseball at 26 years old, and he already has all these accomplishments behind him. I mean, he's of all the 25-year-old people, who ever played in baseball, he has the most walks through that age, but by far. It's not even close. And so he is really some other kind of great. I don't know that we've seen his peak. Some guys peak in their early 20s, but it seems to me like he could go out this year and give you guys 35 home runs, 120 walks, and everybody would be disappointed while he has an MVP caliber year.
Yeah, and he certainly. I don't think that we're going to see him get a lot better in his late 20s, but he's certainly a guy who has the capability to have that 90. That he still has that 95th percentile type season in him somewhere. Mm-hmm. And he's got the kind of skills that will age well. And frankly, if you're investing, $700 million in a guy, he has the mental makeup you want, right? He just has that tremendous competitive intensity that he brings. And you kind of assume at least that that's a guy who's probably going to be able to sustain that, even when he's sort of going home at the end of the day and lying in a bathtub full of $100 bills, which not everybody does. Right.
Right.
But, Soto is about as good an investment as you've seen since A-Rod. And I always remind people, that first contract that A-Rod signed, it was, everybody laughed at it because it was the most outlandish amount of money.
Yeah.
And it was a good deal. He was worth it. He was worth it for the years that he signed that first contract. He was worth it. The Yankees signed him to another one that he, gave them some great years, but he wasn't totally worth the second one that he signed in his, his mid-30s. But the first deal, he was absolutely worth every penny of that contract.
Yeah. And by the way,
the Giants never went back and were like, dang, I wish we hadn't spent all that money on Barry Bonds,
Right. No, yeah, he's probably the greatest free agent story ever. 24-year-old free agents don't come along every day either. and be that good at 24. It's not like some guy who came up at 18 and was a relief pitcher and it's like, now I'm a free agent. Okay, that's a different guy. But you got a guy who's leading teams and MVP caliber seasons at 24 years old. That essentially cannot happen anymore. He and Beltre are the last youngest guys to come up. Beltre's just about 90 days into his 19th year when he comes up. So it's him and A-Rod, and everybody else has debuted older than those guys. Maybe just a little bit, but they are the youngest guys. You can go back into the 70s and get bonus babies and all that, but from the modern time, they're it. Nobody's going to start baseball at 17 or 18 years anymore. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see another. I mean, Robin Yount was an outlier even in his day.
Right.
You know, the big thrust into a major league lineup at 17.
Yeah.
And you know, and it took Yount. I mean, he broke in 74.
Right.
It took him like 3 years before he was sort of an adequate hitter, and then it wasn't until 80 that he actually sort of turned into an offensive force of any kind.
Right.
You know, which he then was for a decade, but it took him a long time to learn his game. He also, of course, quit at one point to become a golfer. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. In order to hit the market at that age, you have to be good enough that a team is willing to stick you in the major league lineup when you're 20, 21, you know. Or possibly like Adrian Beltre, you have to have a team that has some degree of uncertainty about exactly how old you are. Or I mean, in that case, the Dodgers were in on it. They knew,
right,
that they had lied about.
At least at the senior level, right? You know, like,
He was not one of the ones where like he just sort of passed it off and the team got snookered. But
yeah. I wrote a little something about him and early starts in general. You know, most early starts don't work out, but if it does work out, it's almost exclusively Hall of Famers. You know, if they can handle it, whatever it is, all of the it's right. And one of the things about Beltre is, you know,
right.
like,
Ty Cobb was a teenager, you know, Babe Ruth was a teenager, like, you know.
Right. Yeah. Melott, these guys Melott came up at 17 also. Beltre won the AA MVP at basically 18 years old. You know, what are you going to teach that guy now? You know, I mean, was he ready? No, but what else was he going to learn in AAA? I mean, he destroyed the minor leagues, and he was a year younger than everybody thought. Like at 19, he won no. At 18, he won the MVP. He's going to be starting at third base for the Dodgers at 19. That, you know, that's crazy. That must still exist, though. That those people who just have that God-given touch where they're just going to be able to play with people who are 8 years older than them. It's just because that's what happens when you debut at 19 or 18 years old.
Right. That's the old story about, you know, why for his whole NHL career, Wayne Gretzky tucked his jersey into his right. Because he spent his whole time growing up playing against people who were like so much older than him that they didn't have jerseys small enough for him. So he just, for being a kid, he tucked the jersey in. Right. Like, you know, but I mean, you're going to get those sort of absolute prodigies. You know, and the guys who are that elite level of good very often are, you know, and frankly, oftentimes it's because, you know, because your dad was like Bobby Bonds or Ken Griffey Sr. or, you know, Sandy Alomar or somebody.
Well, Beltre's dad was really good friend with Felipe Alou. And he's like, hey, my kid's special. You know, he just is. And he's going to be a baseball player, which, okay, great. You're in the Dominican. That's it. But Felipe's like, okay, bring him along. And he was always there. He didn't fall asleep. He was part of the baseball world. And he was guided by these people that you can't know more about baseball than Felipe Alou. You know, like, that's just not possible. And so if he's got you under his wing, you're going to be getting a lot of wonderful things. So I guess maybe it takes several special circumstances to come together to make that kind of a player.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, you know, we have this conversation sometimes in like show business in particular. I think they talk about, you know, like nepotism and stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, you know, it's first of all, there's a certain inherent unfairness in the whole world. In that sometimes people get good at things that other people aren't good at because they grew up in the business. And yes, there's also the unfairness that sometimes people get jobs they don't deserve and aren't good enough at because they have connections. But the reality is that very often in sports, is such a meritocracy that you see it, is that you get people who are just better at the game because they have good genes, and because they were drilled from very early on in knowing, that's how you get the Mannings, that's how you get Kobe Bryant, that's how you get Barry Bonds, and you see it, sport after sport. And it's not because people are giving these guys opportunities that they don't have the skills for. It's because they have the combination of the, athletic talent and the learned skills from early on to know how to be better at this stuff.
Yeah, they have that access. And for the ones that it doesn't work out, we don't get mad about those Nepo babies who it's like, whatever. Art Campanis' kid, who was going to be the third Campanis in generation, he didn't make it. It's all little Pete, he didn't make it. All these guys that weren't quite good enough. When people get mad about steroids, and I'm like, we had a twin study in steroids. One guy made it. One guy was not very good, and I don't want to knock Ozzie Canseco, but we don't know what the value of steroids is or isn't. No one's taking the time to prove the deleterious or the good effect of it. We just know that we're mad about it. And that,
I mean, I think there's no question it helped. And I think we can see that, but it's not like you just take a pill and you're magically great at baseball. Right. And Bill James once had a line about how giving Fenway Park to Jim Rice is like giving Superman brass knuckles. And that's how I always felt about Barry Bonds taking steroids. I'm like, this is unfair. Like he's already so good.
But he also blew out his left arm. I think it was left arm, his tendon in his left arm, and then developed bone chips. And they have all these other things that come with that increased strength. Your body has to withstand it too. So there is that, Canseco is never reliably healthy. And so there is the negative. We just don't ever seem to want to bother with So anyhow, when you look at the Mets and you see Soto joining that lineup, first off, that team was terrible for the first third of the season, way underperformed, right? And then they came roaring back, and Lindor put him on his back, and I think he was the MVP last year. But that's a good lineup now, especially if Vientos is, continues to be good, and if Pete Alonso does what he normally does, that's a really, really good lineup.
Yeah, I mean, like with Vientos, you'd like to see Vientos take what he did this year and either build on it or at least expand it to a full season. But, if he takes a 10% step back in quality and makes up for that with it, playing that out to a full season, he's still, he's giving them a big addition. He's not going to sneak up on anybody anymore. But you have, that lineup is potentially really, really imposing. And if you have some guys there who maybe aren't going to quite do what they did last year, and they haven't brought back Jose Iglesias, who had a sort of one of those lightning strike kind of years where he hit 337. But you've got all of these young infielders, right? Mauricio and Acuna. You've got, Francisco Alvarez is a guy who still has the capacity, I think, to have a, 35, 40 homer kind of season. He's got that kind of power if if he's able to sort of deal with the, both improve his plate discipline a little, which he had stretches of last year, and combine that with being able to stay a little healthier and avoid the, not just the missed time, but the sort of ways that catchers getting banged up hurts you. So, there is a lot of potential there.
Yeah. I'm a big believer that the Barry Bonds folks, Sheffield, all these guys, they are the alpha of the lineup, and they don't require protection. They are the protection. If you remember the 93 Giants, Barry batted fifth, but if you messed up with Will Clark or Robbie Thompson or any of those, if you didn't get them out, then you had a world of trouble coming. And so he loomed over the whole line more than I've ever seen any other batter do. And for me, Juan Soto is one of those guys. He's one of those guys that's just like, he's coming up soon, because you're not going to get him out, not reliably. He's going to get on base 400 to 450. 400 will be a disappointment, right? He almost has to regress. He's so good. But there he is. He's always coming up. So where would you put him in the lineup?
I mean, look, I'd love to have him as high as possible in the lineup.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see him batting like second or third or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you have Nimmo, who's a good sort of top of the order guy.
Yeah.
I mean, you definitely want Soto ahead of Pete.
Okay.
I mean, I think the idea is maybe you have Nimmo and Lindor, and then Soto, and then Pete, and then Vientos. Something along those lines, and that's a heck of a front five. And then you've got some of these other guys in the back.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's why you acquire someone at the deadline, is to tighten up the back end of that lineup, right?
yeah, I mean, you get, or somebody you're plugging in as a platoon, because you don't know who's going to get hurt too.
Right. Yeah. The would you not want a guy like Vientos in front of Soto just to get the benefit of like, we're gonna have to throw this guy something to hit?
Yeah, but you have Lindor. I mean,
no, that's true. Yeah,
and
I keep forgetting about Lindor.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's easy to. I mean, he was like the team's MVP last year, right?
Yeah,
and almost the league's MVP in a year that didn't have somebody doing what Ohtani did. I think he might well have been the MVP of the league. Obviously, there's a challenge in keeping Lindor quite as healthy as he was last year. He played through a lot down the stretch. But I mean, you have him up front. I think you can get a lot out of that with him batting first or second. So
I know you're an East Coast guy, so over here there's still a lot of angry A's fans. They root against John Fisher, and you and I have talked about like Oakland was a dead market long ago, but what do you see? What do you hear from people in general about the A's moving to Vegas, the stadium that continues to go forward? Yet some people are like, it's not going to get built, because the A's have a history of not getting things built. But from what I can see, everything points to them going in the right direction towards debuting a new ballpark in 2028. But I'm on the West Coast. What do you think over there on the East Coast?
Yeah, I mean, I don't run into that many people here who are still bitter about the A's leaving Philadelphia. I mean, look, they've been, like the Raiders, they've been sort of Buccaneers for a long time, going from city to city. It's deep in the franchise history. Look, I mean, Oakland, that relationship clearly, I mean, it's unfortunate, obviously, that we have owners who are able to extort municipalities that way. And there's layers of, maybe what government ought to be doing to prevent that. But the fact is that I mean, it just wasn't working. It was not working for a long time. So, it's unfortunate, because they do have, they had a wonderful history in Oakland. And not just one wonderful history. I mean, they had a couple of them, right? I mean, they had
eras,
a couple of different great teams, sort of those Moneyball teams, the Mustache Gang, the Bash Brothers. But they're the A's. It's what they do.
We like to pick on billionaires. We don't like them, right? And so we want them to build a stadium with their own money. And folks just don't seem to realize they're going to pass that on in terms of ticket prices and hot dog prices, right? And so, sure, maybe it doesn't return well your investment if you use bonds and tax measures to pay for a stadium, but really, it's a luxury item, right? And I don't know if you recall, but when the Cardinals are getting ready to build Busch 2, you know what? You guys are having a little bit of trouble finding the money for us, but we're not going to cross the river over to Illinois. We think we can get it built over there. And all of a sudden, St. Louis is like, hold on a second. We found some money, and so either not this is just me being a dick, I guess, but communities that want to keep their major league teams act like it, and they figure out how to get it done. And that's why almost every stadium has had some amount of public money. Is it a good investment? Probably not always, but I think Baltimore is better for having Camden Yards, even if they got to put another $1 billion into it to get it modernized and everything else. I don't tend to agree that billionaires are bad people.
But they're, I mean, they're self-interested.
Sure.
businessmen who drive a hard bargain, or they wouldn't get to be billionaires, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Yeah.
few people who either inherited the team or inherited the money that bought the team. But, the guys who buy baseball teams tend to be the kind of guys who make $1 billion. And those are,
Right.
that they're not sort of the kinder, gentler sort of next door
Right.
neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly, on the other hand, the great irony, of course, is, that the Dodgers, right, is that the Dodgers weren't asking for public money in Brooklyn.
Right. Yeah.
And yet no owner probably has ever been as vilified as Walter O'Malley for pulling up stakes and leaving town when they wouldn't even let him build a a stadium that he wasn't asking for a dime for.
Yeah. Well, and also they are vilified because LA City kicked people out of Chavez Ravine. It's not even the Dodgers' fault. They're like, hey, we're coming. Like, we got all this land that we didn't use properly.
Yeah. But also LA figured out something very important, which is that, you know what, if you give them the land, they'll stay on it a long time. Yeah, right. They own the land. And that's one reason they've, kept up Chavez Ravine instead of trying to build a new place. Because they own it.
Yeah. Third oldest ballpark. And with no signs of it ever. I mean, they dumped a bunch of money in before the All-Star game. And they just dumped a bunch of money in this year too. So that place is, I don't know if you've been, you were here last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful there.
I mean, and obviously the Southern California weather kind of helps, keep the building in shape, because as long as you avoid fires and earthquakes, the amount of sort of natural damage to your building is going to be less there than, than what you get if you're in like Boston or Detroit or Cleveland or somewhere. But
I don't know how they keep Fenway together. That thing is so old, and it is just it's so obsolete compared to all the new ballparks. And at some point they may have to get rid of it. I mean, you remember when they sold the team the last time, they almost built a new Fenway until they figured out how to make this one work. I don't know how many of those rebuilds they have in it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the place is held together with Dunkin' Donuts coffee at this point. So
right. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Donald Trump a little bit? I wouldn't mind asking a couple questions.
Now we've moved on to former USFL owner Donald Trump. Yes.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think you and I are kind of in the same boat where I am not a Trumpian person. But I'm suspect of anybody. You get all the accolades and arrows if you're the boss. So he's the boss and making big changes. With those big changes come a lot of problems, no matter what he does. So I don't know. What are your thoughts with all of these executive orders, all of this action to turn over the apple cart and try to get a new apple cart?
Yeah, it's very much as you would predict, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, he's done some really wonderful things so far. He's done some pretty awful things and things that I think are flatly unconstitutional or illegal. And then he's done some things where he's trying to get in a good direction, but he's going about it in a sort of ham-handed way. The jury's got to be still out on a lot of his negotiating tactics, a lot of his foreign affairs stuff. I've been appalled at how he's been talking about Ukraine, for example. But at the end of the day, and look, I mean, the next time that we're having sort of a primary campaign to figure out who's going to run the party, I think it's a fair argument to have about, how we should express ourselves on the world stage. But the reality is Trump's going to be Trump, and he's really going to be judged on, does he get a good deal or not in a lot of these things, in dealing with Mexico, China, on TikTok, on Ukraine. He's got a lot of irons in the fire where he could potentially do a lot of good and he could potentially do a lot of harm. And it's too early to tell what he's going to get back. I mean, I certainly have not liked some of his sort of negotiating strategies that maybe give too much away up front. The executive orders, executive orders at the end of the day, it's unhealthy that we're so governed by executive orders, but there's executive orders and executive orders, right? There's a big difference between ordering the federal government that it should do business in a particular way, which, unless there's a statute on the books on the is often something that's properly within presidential power, and
Mhm.
using executive orders as if they're legislation, as if you can govern
Mhm.
the country that way. Um, I think politicians also, they have to be judged on kind of two tracks, and I think this is
Mhm.
so much more true of him than others, which is, and I say this not meaning to downplay the extent to which he's sort of bad for American civics, but
Mhm.
um, at the end of the day, there's sort of what you're doing in Washington, and then there's the results you're getting. And I think a lot of the people who voted for him this time around understand he's going to bring chaos to Washington. And it's going to be a lot of heartburn and a lot of running around breaking the crockery. And they're pretty much okay with that if he delivers, and they're not okay with that if he doesn't deliver. And so,
Yeah.
I think people are gonna, he's got time, because when you're the new president, you can always spend the first year of it getting away with a lot of stuff by just blaming the
Yeah.
last guy, right?
Yeah.
It's the old, prepare two envelopes,
Mhm.
thing. But um, but people are going to want to see that the cost of living is under control. They're going to want to see that he is, controlling the border. They're going to want to see, um, that he's that he's actually maybe bringing an end to the war in Ukraine in a way that isn't just hanging out a big sign that says you know come back later, Vlad, when you're fully loaded. um and so down the line, I think he's really going to be judged
Mhm.
much more so even than usual, not on what he says, because people understand that he's just a BS guy, and that's just part of who he is.
Mhm.
And but people are gonna demand results. They're not gonna stand for, oh, this is not going to be like the Obama thing. Like a lot of people kind of gave Obama, oh, he means well, he has good intentions, like, he inspires us. Like, nobody thinks that about Trump, right? I mean, not even his biggest fans. That they're
Yeah.
like, Trump is there to, like, uh, basically, chew bubble gum and kick tail, and he's out of bubble gum. So, we'll see what he does.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
really think that's what so much of this comes down to. I mean, I'm sort of alarmed by some of the stuff he's doing in the Justice Department. Um, but I think, and there's some other areas like that, but
Yeah.
doing, a certain amount of disruption needs to be done, and we'll see where that all shakes out.
Well, you talked about foreign policy. We don't demand a lot from our, potential elected officials in terms of foreign policy. I mean, if we're just going to talk about the last two candidates, obviously Donald Trump has a way of doing things. Let's negotiate a deal. Let's make it worth everybody's while, and let's, do tariffs, and let's find a way to make a better deal for everybody. And that's sort of his approach. I'm making a very small statement about a very big thing. Kamala Harris wasn't any better. She was like, "We'll tell Israel to do this." Those were her words. Well, tell Israel to do this. And so
Well, yeah, I mean,
I
one
don't
of
know
her
what was,
problems is
yeah.
that she's an idiot, which has never
Well,
helped.
I mean, she didn't instill confidence in her intellect. That's for sure. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And just to go a little further on the foreign policy thing, foreign policy people, they're kind of like traveler's surety. They know how to get the job done, and they don't take any risk at all. They just stay right inside this little thing, and they slowly go down this road. So it's freaking them out. All my people who have been ambassadors, and, they are like, what in the hell is going on? But it's always been true that we were going to negotiate with Russia at the end of this war. Do we invite in Ukraine a little bit? Okay, sure. But really, it's us and Russia that are going to figure this thing out. Um, and nobody's going to be happy with the outcome. But President Trump's right. There's people just being ground into the earth, and the amount of damage that's done to a society from that. It is a good thing to end it. It's not supposed to be a comfortable end, but this is not a defense of Donald Trump. But I'd rather have no war there as opposed to something that drags on and maybe does go nuclear or does tip another place in the balance. I mean, Putin has a lot of leverage he can pull. To think he had zero role in the Hamas attack, I would say that's not a fair bet. I'm not saying he caused it, but could he push a button and cause other conflicts? Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I've said from the beginning. I mean, I'm very much pro on the Ukrainian side of this, and I think that it's important and valuable for the United States to, demonstrate the will to resist Russia and to do so
Mhm.
at the cost of money rather than at the cost of having to put our own soldiers on the line.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good bargain. But at the same time, I've said from the beginning this thing needs to end with a negotiated settlement, and I think you are well past the point of. Should hope that the Ukrainian government. I mean, look, I think a lot of the stuff Pete Hegseth said was stuff that was foolish to say out loud in a negotiation,
Yeah.
but also was not wrong. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
Ukrainians, you're not going to get peace in 2025 that restores the Ukrainians' borders and
No.
to where they were in 2021, let alone to where they were in 2013. And I would like the United States government to maintain the at least rhetorical posture that this is stolen land that the Russians have captured, but that doesn't change the basic reality that they've got it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if we're going to get a deal, the only way you get a deal is if the deal is minimally acceptable to both Putin and Zelensky, right?
Yeah.
Both
Right.
both sides have to give, and the
Yeah.
more, but they're also looking at, you have two hands, right? So the more you give out of one hand, the more you should be able to take with the other. And so to me, where maybe a better deal is to be had is to make, is for the Ukrainians to accept the loss of some of their territory in exchange for more security guarantees, and making sure that you have defensible frontiers.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
because what you want at the end of the day is the ability to say, whatever country we're left with at the end of this, we can defend. We're not,
Yeah.
this is not, we're not going to be looking back and saying, so this one was the second partition of Ukraine of three or four of them. You don't want to
Right.
end up like Poland in the 1790s.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also the legitimate NATO argument, and not forcing Russia's hand. We have done a lot to box them in, right or wrong, from their point of view. That's right. The other thing I would say is our desire to work with Ukraine on the back end is powerful for them. And I just from my indirect involvement with any kind of industrialists from Ukraine, they're like, we would love to be a competitor against China for you guys. We've got all the energy we need in the ground. We have tons of minerals. We would love to manufacture things for you. And that's a good deal for us. That's a good deal for them. But no matter what we do, Ukraine and Russia are going to share a border. They're going to share pipelines. And so they've got to get along in a way that lasts. We don't need a bunch of uh, unsettled land. And so if we will allow these
Right. But
big,
what you want is for them
yeah,
to get along the way Russia gets along with Finland,
yeah, right,
not the
yeah,
way they get along with, say, Belarus.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And if we can get out of their way and let the people who are industrialists there build back that capacity, they'll be fine. They won't need a lot of our help in terms, especially the kind of help we usually bring. Here's a small business loan. Do you have women that want to own a laundry shop? All that kind of shit. Get all that out of the way and let the industrialists do industrial things, and they will have a powerful between their farmland and that. There's no, I don't want to simplify that process, but it only gets worse if we get over there with a bunch of NGOs trying to empower things and people.
Yeah, and then the NGOs bring in their own set of, you must follow this laundry list of American progressive ways of
Right.
doing things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like, you can't build this factory without without celebrating Pride Month. Like, no, that's not. That's
Yeah.
the Marshall Plan wasn't like that.
Oh, I've heard this exact example. We don't want to go out and scrape the ground up and build solar panels when we can scrape the ground and pull out titanium and sell it around the world. And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, like what are we doing? Let those dudes scrape titanium out of the ground and go do what they do, and they don't need solar panels. They certainly don't need, look, I've academically written on the stupid, female engagement programs we try, because it's more performative for us than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. There's so many. And look, I mean, the knock on Ukraine that it's corrupt. First of all, um, yes.
Yes.
Second of all, they're not exactly the only ones.
Right.
And I think, I mean, any kind of aid program, foreign aid program, has to just build in an expectation that, there's a certain level of corruption you get in American government, or, sort of high level Western government. And the further you get, the more there's going to be. You have to accept that that's a reality. You try to structure your things around it so more stuff doesn't get stolen. But that's just an inherent part of the business. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it is true though that the longer this goes on, the harder it is to rebuild the Ukrainian economy and stuff, all of which is a good reason. It's certainly a good reason to be at the peace table now.
Yeah.
I don't think another year of this is going to make a better deal. The question is, are the Russians going to simply dig in and say, you get nothing and like it, at which point, you can't just let them dictate terms to you.
Right.
And Trump has this ethos of everything is negotiable, and that can be an asset or it can be a drawback. But you have to go in there treating it like you're playing with your own money here. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of money, I want to ask you this too, because again, I've got some dealings that give me some insight in some of this stuff. But the worry is that, and I think President Trump might be pretty good at this, because there is a lot of corruption. It's tough to prove in court reliably that you own or have the rights to something without it leaking into the European courts. You come back with your award from the European higher court, and then Ukraine still says, stuff it, belongs to me, and you can't say otherwise. There's a lot of that has happened. Still has a lot of old Soviet dudes in there who run their lives and their politics in that way. I mean, Zelensky has lost a lot of money. I think a lot of us have a good idea where a lot of it went to. These guys are openly corrupt with these things. So how does that impact business? And do you have confidence that Donald Trump can help make, it doesn't even need to, make businesses who want to go do business in Ukraine protected so that they're not getting bamboozled with, thuggery?
yeah, well, I mean, that's also why you want to be in a position where the Ukrainian government feels that it owes you more than it owes somebody else, because that's the way you get listened to when you knock on the door about that. I mean, look, however corrupt the Ukrainian system is, more Russian influence is not the solution to that. It's you don't get less corrupt by having more Russian influence. Let's put it that way.
You could have said U.S. influence, and I would have laughed just as hard, though.
Well, yeah. But but that's the thing. I mean, again, like Trump is trying to force Trump and the people around him are trying to force a rethinking of a lot of things. And at a certain global level, that does have to happen. But that doesn't mean that everything you decide to break is necessarily the right thing to break, or that you have something ready to replace it. So I think there is but I think a lot of people are going to be watching this. A lot of international actors are going to be watching this because they're gonna see how easy is it for Trump to get rolled, right? And I just I don't buy I do not buy the I buy the idea that we should be putting more of our assets into Asia and trying to find ways to get the Europeans to stand up a little better, and be less dependent on us. But I do not for 1 minute buy the idea that you can make yourself stronger in the Pacific by being sort of weak and giving away stuff at the table to the Russians. I think you do that, and everybody else is going to read that you're a mark. They read that Biden was a mark after they saw what he did in Afghanistan, and everybody else everybody from Putin to Hamas figured that into their calculations. I don't
Yeah.
think that's necessarily caused single-handedly what else happened over the next couple of years, but everybody recalibrated their sense of what they had to worry about from the United States of America after the Afghanistan withdrawal. And and I mean, like, you look at like JFK, right? That's what happened after the Bay of Pigs. As it turned out, people underestimated JFK, right? Because they thought he could be rolled, and that's how you ended up with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that you do not want you do not want to spend your first night on the cell block giving away all your cigarettes.
Do you got time for one more? Can I?
And that's what worries me about Trump and Russia right now, is that's what he might
think that's
do.
a legitimate concern. Yeah. Do you have time for one more topic real quick?
Yeah.
On Trump. Okay. The other thing I wanted to say was totally agree with you on that we don't want to give things away. And as a guy that's been abroad and talked to a lot of people, what we feel about our own personal politics. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. That means fuck all to a lot of the rest of the country. They look and they go, you guys are in a bad spot, because all of them could see that Joe Biden was compromised before he won the election. And they knew that was weakness and that somebody else was in charge, and they acted like that. And I heard this time and time again from people who don't live here. And they look back at our politics and said, there's going to be opportunity there. It's basically what they said. Like, I'm not speaking for all of them, but I'm kind of taking what they all said and putting it together. I want to give you a chance to comment on that, but I also want to throw in there, Kash Patel is either or about to be confirmed. And there seems to be a lot of
he's been confirmed, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And then holding folks accountable. Like, I want to hold folks accountable. When you get something wrong and it causes the nation a lot of problems, these generals that have lost wars, all these people that do things, I want that, but I don't know that it's good that I get that. And so if we're going to go after judges and governors and DAs, I don't know that I'm comfortable with how that goes, because that opens a can of worms that anybody can open up themselves later on. And we don't need a place like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you have to have mechanisms for accountability that bite, right? And the question is, how do you strike a balance between having mechanisms for accountability that bite with not turning into, a place where you have this sort of ruinous, mutually assured destruction of everybody prosecuting everybody else. And I mean, look, one of the ways that we ended up in the lawfare situation with Trump getting these abusive prosecutions brought against him is because some of our other mechanisms have failed. I think we failed, we failed to impeach Bill Clinton or remove him from office when he had committed obvious felonies. That was the proper political remedy that the founders devised. I think because of that, Republican senators just dug themselves in against removing Trump. And so, that left you with sort of the legal system looking at January 6th and everything and saying, we have to find some other way to get Trump. And that led them to some dark places they shouldn't have gone. And so I think you want to be in a position where you have levers of power and accountability that are reasonable, because the alternative, Franklin thought that impeachment, that, sort of that if you didn't have impeachment, you'd end up with like duels or the guillotine or something, that like,
right.
That basically like these political mechanisms are supposed to be other things by other means, war by other means, prosecution by other means. So, I think that is a real concern. I think, again, if to the extent to which Patel comes in and tries to rework, I think the FBI should be rethinking some of its missions. I tend to agree with my colleague Andy McCarthy that they really just need to get rid of the FBI's counterintelligence mission. It's just, it's problematic to have that housed in the same agency as a law enforcement. On the other hand, you don't want to go back to where you were pre 9/11, where the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement agencies can't share information with each other.
Right.
But there's a big difference between that and having, a single agency that's supposed to be doing both missions, because you cross lines there way too easily.
Can you house counterintelligence and I'm sorry. Can you house counterintelligence and DOE and those kind of places?
Yeah,
They
I
have
mean, I don't know,
agencies. Yeah.
because the problem is that you need a domestic you need domestic intelligence, domestic counterintelligence, and there's a lot of people who get very nervous about doing intelligence work with like the CIA
Yeah.
or somebody inside your own borders. But
Right.
that's
Right.
work that needs to be done no matter what hat you have the person doing it wearing, right? You need to be looking at counterintelligence, you need to be looking at, counterterror.
Where would you house
All
it?
that
Like if you
stuff.
had agents just targeting university research, right, and they were trying to find people who are compromising things, who? And this isn't a challenge like saying you can't have it under the FBI, but where would you place a national counterintelligence organization so that it wasn't,
Yeah,
bound
I'm
up
not.
in the FBI?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the right sort of hat
Okay,
and
fair enough.
alphabet
Yeah.
soup for that would be. I mean, one
Well,
of the things
Peter
I've
Strzok
argued for,
is a
yeah,
problem.
one of the
Sorry,
things
go
I've
ahead.
argued for actually totally separately, like before this, is that we ought to have a separate inspector general department
Yes.
for political investigations.
Yeah.
And you could ensure sort of giving that department some perspective by insisting that it hires only people from FBI and DOJ backgrounds and stuff. So people who have learned how the system works in non-political cases. But I
Yeah.
actually think that one of the problems we've had with DOJ is that the attorney general's attention and mental bandwidth and political capital gets eaten alive by the small class
Mm.
of cases DOJ handles that involve investigating people prominent in politics, when the bulk of what the Justice Department's supposed to be doing is like keeping the streets safe and,
Right.
prosecuting, internet, interstate drug cartels and all this other
Sure.
stuff that like has nothing to do with like, prosecuting the mayor of New York. Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think putting that in a separate department it'd be like putting a lightning rod on your house. And you'd have to, the attorney general could go to bed at night and not have to worry about lightning burning his house down.
Yeah.
Because he's got a lot else to do.
Well, that,
Or she, as the case may be at the moment.
yeah. Right. Well, so I appreciate all of this stuff. I'll let you wrap up with any kind of closing thoughts. Always wonderful to talk to you. Baseball stuff is awesome, and it was great talking candidly and like without like rationally about Donald Trump, because so often it's either straight adoration or it's straight hate, and that doesn't do us any good. So I appreciate you doing
Yeah,
that.
and I mean, look, I've said my pieces about all of my sort of general objections to Trump's character over the years, but he's the president. We only get one president at a time, and I think you
Yeah.
just have to deal with sort of what's the best we can get out of him in the 4 years we have him, or if
Yeah.
it's not 4 years. And
Yeah.
look, I mean, what people are watching around the world is there's two, if you're like, a foreign leader, there's two ways you can see Trump, right? Maybe you'll see, okay, this guy's 78, he's easily flattered, he likes to just declare victory and go home. Or you can see this dude is, a bull in a china shop, he's unpredictable, you don't want to make him mad. And I think the next couple months are going to set the real tone for that, for how they're really going to interpret the restored Trump. So
Yeah.
but otherwise, it's always fun being here, and let's play ball.
All right, let's do it. Stand by. I'm going to hang this up, and everybody else.